name is Clarke. I'm an RN. I've been a nurse for almost 30 years, which is crazy. Time flies. Anyway, and I've been at Jamie's Place now for a couple of years. I have experience in lots of different aspects of healthcare. Trauma, hospice was kind of near and dear to my heart, which is kind of what brought me to the path of working at Jamie's Place.
And I have been at Jamie's Place for about 11 years, and I've been doing this for about 18 years, and I got on the path of more administrative the last 6 years or so. And so I'm really passionate about the culture around living with dementia, that, you know, there's no cure for dementia, so what we need to change is our culture. So we need to change the way we view these individuals living with dementia, that they're just humans. And we need to humanize that. And so looking at them with a holistic approach to care is what we need to do. And so I'm really passionate about changing the culture around dementia.
I'm Tracy Sprauer, Sprauer, and I'm now the program director. Most of you probably know I was the first executive director of Methow at home. And for a while, we had a little lag, well, especially during COVID. We just had a little bit of a lag in our needs. There weren't that many people with members with cognition issues, and now it's arisen more in our membership and seeking more support, especially for caregivers, because it's such a big job. And so we just were like, let's ask these two to come in and do a supplementary training on this. And I too, my grandmother had dementia, and I see the need for that culture shift and change. And I saw different ways that my family would talk to my grandmother, and it was really shocking to me. And so I just love the idea of as a culture making this shift to see the person, see the beingness that's present. I'm grateful for this opportunity to learn more always. There's always so much more to learn. And so thanks so much for your time, everybody, for coming and being here so that we can know better and do better.
Absolutely. So one thing we were going to start with is you want to write? One thing that we always start with is we want to know what your guys' perception is when you hear the word dementia. What comes to mind? This is part of changing our culture. So what are some things that come to mind when you think of someone that has dementia?
They are really there for that moment only. Moving through it pretty quickly. So it has really taught me to be in the moment.
Yes.
A bad thing.
Yeah. In our culture, I think it is that it's not a good thing to have dementia.
Yeah, it's scary. Kind of feel like it's a downward spiral, or that it's not going to get better.
Right.
I don't really like that word dementia because it's so close to demented, which has such a negative connotation. So the word itself has such a negative connotation.
Yeah, and we talked, Tracy and I talked about this. So kind of in our world, and Jamie's Place, you may or may not know, but is part of the greenhouse model, which we won't get into here. But basically, we want to focus on retained abilities for people living with dementia, and people living with dementia, or PLWD, people living with dementia is kind of the term that we use. And it's that focusing on where they are kind of in that moment as well, and leaning into how they're presenting. I mean, I think that's the thing that we need to continually go back to, which we'll go over in a minute. But, yeah, so people living with dementia is kind of the term that we use.
Yeah. So when you look at a lot of these words that are on here, with the exception of a couple of them, our culture in general, when they think of people living with dementia, they think of something scary. They don't know how to approach them. They think that they are demented, that they don't, their purpose is is not as useful in the world. And when you think of that, what we can do is we can change how we think about that. We can't change their disease and there is no cure, but we can change the way we all think about them and the position that they have in our society. So that's what we can do. And so a big thing in the greenhouse model is changing the way that we're thinking and focusing on people where they're at in the moment. So I think that's the biggest tool that we all have. And one thing that we all have is we have each other. And I know from working with people with dementia, every moment is different. Something that worked 5 minutes ago could not work in 5 minutes. So, I mean, it just depends on where they're at in the stage, and really using one another to support each other. Every day with our caregivers, we talk about what's working, what's not working, how we can do better. Because the journey is just so up and down. Every single day, it's just ever changing. So I think it's just focusing a lot on what they can do and changing how we think about them, is that they're useful and that they have purpose in our society and that they can still participate in our society and be a part of our community. And we can focus on the things that they still can do, like go to the library and walk, and so sweet. I mean, he's a delight to have at Jamie's Place. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And he really does interact with the world still. He goes to the library and, you know, he has a lot of knowledge. I mean, it is scattered, but you can pull apart those parts that mean something to him. And when you spark that conversation, that's what it's about.
And you can see his face light up.
Yeah.
He gets that sort of sideways smile, and yeah. So I think one of a good place to start, and we've sort of touched on it already, but is we need to get a lot of our cues from them. So I think that's the place to start. Where are they in that moment? Is this a good moment? Is this a difficult moment? Is it one of those moments where they might be leaning into what we're trying to get out of his behaviors? So when someone with dementia is having a challenging behavior, it's an unmet need. It's not a behavior. So that's kind of a vernacular we're trying to get rid of. So any type of agitation or frustration is coming from an unmet need that they have. Are they constipated? Are they hungry? Do they have to pee? Are they in pain? So getting at the root of what those issues are so that we can meet that need before there are any issues that arise, so they don't get agitated or any of those kinds of things. So again, being in the moment with them is really important, and getting your cues from them before you move forward and trying to communicate with them. When you are interacting with someone with dementia, there's a couple of basic things that you need to understand. Vision is something that is lost, especially the peripheral vision very early on in dementia. And that can cause a lot of stress and anxiety, more than just the obvious thing. Obviously, if your vision isn't good, that's going to cause stress and anxiety, but it also affects your ability to sense movement and people's intention. And danger. And if somebody is coming at you from a direction and you can't see them, and then all of a sudden they're in front of you, that causes alarm, extreme anxiety, anger, maybe, all kinds of things like that. And so thinking about how you're approaching somebody with dementia is really important. And the way we typically do that.
Real quick, so if everyone takes their hands and if they go like this and make it maybe right about a quarter, this is what they say people with advanced dementia can see. So when you're approaching them like this, like I can't see Rana at all. So I'd have to oh, that's Rana. So, I mean, if you interacted with the world like that, it kind of just gives a small, teeny little sliver of what, and the fact that their brains can't process half of what you're,
right.
I mean, it's just a good.
And it tends to come in. So, right now our peripheral vision is way out here for most of us, right? And as dementia progresses, it slowly comes this way. And so you can kind of test that a bit with, if you're not sure where your loved one is at, by just seeing, how they interact with you when you approach them. But so what we do in practice, so we're not ever gonna approach them this way, because you're gonna either get a startle response, those things that we already talked about. So when you wanna engage with someone, you wanna get directly in front of them. Essentially, you wanna get in front of them so that they can see you. And you don't wanna enter their space until they've invited you in. So the way to get that is, first you're gonna connect with them visually. So you probably couldn't really see what I was doing. So you're gonna connect visually with them. And then once you've got that visual connection, then if you reach out to them and they grab your hand, they've invited you in. So that's the way to make the connection, so that then you can then either communicate or do whatever it is that you wanted to do, whether it was you just want to have a conversation, or if you need them to go somewhere or help them, to go to bed or brush their teeth or whatever.
And most people really respond really well to positive cues, like smiling. That's why we pretty much have not given up on masks, but it is insanely hard to communicate with people living with dementia with masks on, because your smile and they see happy, and they are much more willing to go with you. If you go in and you're like, hey, we need to do this, and you're just like, they can't see you, they can't process what you're saying, their brain is just and they're instantly agitated.
Absolutely.
And it's really common knowledge. None of us would want to be approached like that. When you approach me, I want you to look at me, I want you to talk
Well,
to
and
me.
we would never do
You wouldn't just
the
go
behaviors that people do with people who are, at home or in a facility. You would never do that to somebody else. You would always ask for permission to touch somebody, or at least have that familiarity. You wouldn't, ever do that. And when people living with dementia, and you have to provide care for them, whether it's personal care or just assisting with their activities of daily living, if they're at a dementia point where they're not even sure what you're doing, it feels like an assault. Whether a personal assault, if you have to provide care to somebody, if you haven't made a connection with that person yet. If you're just coming up to somebody and just, I'm going to wash your armpit and whatever, you haven't connected with that person, of course you're going to have behaviors. They're going to take a swing at you because you just, came up and started touching me, and I didn't even know you were in the room, right? So the other thing, so not just the vision, but comprehension, and whether they can hear or not has nothing to do with it. When you're talking to somebody with dementia, as their dementia progresses, they lose about 3 to 6 words that you're trying to communicate to them. So if, you don't want to come at them with, hey, what do you want for dinner? What do you want to wear today? I mean, those are all a lot of words, and they have a difficult time trying to track what you're saying, and then that can cause this kind of frustration because they're not really sure what you're saying. And then typically what we all do this, is if they didn't understand what you said the first time, you say it louder and with more words.
Right.
And then it just compounds the issue.
So that's
Fewer
why
words is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
5 words,
5
or, less.
words or less.
When you're
Okay.
dealing with someone who has, they're more advanced in their dementia, 5 words or less. And then you need to give them time to think about what you just said. So you need to pause for a good 60 to 90 seconds. It's a long time,
It is,
but
and
they
it feels,
need that time to process. And it may feel weird to foreign for us to just close our mouths and just pause. But it's really, really vitally important to be patient. And to be in the moment and to slow down. And so it does. 5 words or less. And then give yourself 60 seconds. Let them think about whatever it is you just said, because they cannot process like we can. And when you slow down like that, the behaviors, they just go away. When you really take the time, you don't need interventions like medications and stuff. And that's why the greenhouse movement is so powerful. It's because, these people just need us to focus on something they just need care in a different way. So 5 words or less.
5
and
words or
pause.
less. I'm going to have some follow-up information for all of you as well that I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, because this is a really broad topic.
Yeah,
and we're not going to learn everything. We all need to learn.
Well, and the thing I'm sensing,
60
you know,
minutes.
just listening to everybody's stories are maybe we need to do this more often and have it, you know, this is going to be just this is a general discussion, okay? But it feels like there's maybe a need for some more education on this, the different stages and different levels of dementia, and there's different types of dementia, and they affect the brain differently. So we can figure that out.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that would be good is like the Caregivers 10 Commandments. We have these at Jamie's place. And so always agree, never argue. So no matter what the situation is, they're not in our reality and you're not going to bring them there. So going along with like whatever it is, if it's something scary, like acknowledge that. Like, oh, I hear what you're saying and that sounds really scary. But one thing is I want you to know you are loved and you are safe. I tell them that all the time. You are loved and you are safe. You may not understand, but we do, and you're safe. So you're not going to bring him to a realization that that was a hallucination and it's not reality.
So some dementias come with
Right.
hallucinations, and instead, and just like she said, you arguing with them and telling them that thing isn't there doesn't provide them any comfort.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no comfort in those statements. So
Because it was real to them.
Absolutely. Whether it's real or not, it's real to them, and they're feeling that. So
Redirect, never reason. So when somebody's having a behavior or something's happening, redirecting their attention to something more positive that you want them to, instead of saying, no, you can't do that. No. Like, for instance, if somebody wants to go outside and it's 10 degrees outside, open the door. Because they're going to walk out that door with no coat on and they're going to come back in. Because it's cold. And they know that. So then they've come to their own conclusion. You're giving them their independence. They will come back inside. It's cold. Yeah, it's really cold. Let's go get some hot chocolate. And we'll wait for the bus to come. And they're going to forget about the bus.
Right.
Gentle deception. I mean,
Yeah.
it's distraction. Never shame them for what they're feeling or what they're doing. You know, maybe the reality is peeing in a gentle deception. I mean, it's, just don't be like, no, you can't do that. I mean, one of the things you never tell people is no, you can't. They're adults and you don't treat them like children. Reassure and never lecture. Just it really is. It is a lot of positive reassurance. Reminisce. I don't like the word remember. Don't you remember? Because obviously they don't remember.
Right. Yeah.
So let's go to that memory. I'll go there with you. Tell me about your mom. Tell me about that. Like, instead of saying remember, like maybe saying something like, tell me about that. Repeat. I already told you. Don't you remember? They don't remember, and don't tell them. You just repeated yourself.
And some people with dementia are going to repeat themselves constantly, and there's just nothing that you can do about it.
No.
So you can try to redirect a conversation a different way. You can try to expand on that conversation, like Jessica was saying, tell me about that. Tell me more about that. But and the reason I want to be clear about that is we as caregivers, as loved ones, have to come to peace with that and find our own way of coping with that, because that is not something that we can turn off. So we just need to find a way to like I said, either get it, like when you feel able, get into that conversation with them if you can, talk more about that person or that event or whatever it is, but try to redirect. But in general, you're just going to have to find a way to come to terms with that.
Ask, never command. So you can direct somebody with what you want them to do and still get the positive results you're looking for, but don't tell them you have to get up now. It's time and things like that. So you can ask. Encourage and praise, but don't condescend. So I find working with people, especially, and I'm talking with a little bit more advanced dementia, they really do well to positive reinforcement, like smiles and that was good. I'm glad you were able to do that. Things like that. Focusing again on what they can still do, and just reinforce and never force them. So those are all things that when we talk with some of our new caregivers who are struggling with the repeating thing or something, it's changing the culture. It's changing how we think about it. And all of these things take support, patience, and time. And again, there's no cure. So what we can do is have circles like this to support each other. And this is the behaviors, if you will, we're seeing today. Like, how do you deal with that? What are some resources that you use to focus and to get good results and not the negative behaviors, if you will?
When they used to just heavily medicate and restrain people, people living with dementia, if you're getting people up at 6 o'clock in the morning and forcing them to get into a wheelchair, and you're gonna, cattle walk them to the showers, and you haven't had any personal interaction or connection with that person, that's why people were having all these extreme negative behaviors that they would then get medicated for because they were scared out of their mind. And so changing that culture, that institutionalized way of caring for people living with dementia is so important, and that change is coming, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done, and we're figuring out ways in which, medication is no longer the first response. Some medications are necessary for, Parkinson. I'm not trying to say that medication doesn't have a role. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying medicating for what the industry used to call behaviors and those kinds of things is just not something that's necessary if we just change the way that we are thinking and interacting and caring for those living with dementia. So one other piece I just want to talk about is, I was saying we really need to get our cues from the individual, for the person that we're caring for. So if you see they have a frown on their face, you don't want to just come up with this, hurried, like big, huge smile and be like, hey, we're going to go on a walk or whatever, because clearly there's something going on with them that we need to kind of maybe figure out, why is that frown on their face? So when that is the case, that's when you'd want to, again, approach the way we talked about earlier, get down, connect with them, and see if we can figure out, what is happening in their mind that's causing them that distress before we try to move on to some other activity. Address that feeling or that circumstance that they're having at that moment that may be causing them some distress before we try to get them to move on to do, before we have our agenda come into place, to lunch or whatever you're trying to do.
And I think that one thing is I've interacted with people and it's gone negatively, and I can be like, oh, okay, Jessica, I need to, readdress that differently. So I think it's just living in the moment in that day, whatever it is. I mean, I just think that's why it's about shifting the way you're thinking, is because that's what has to happen. It has to be a shift in your thinking and how you're going to support her in that day. And bathing, I will just say, bathing with people living with dementia is almost every single time a battle. There is actually a whole series about bathing without a battle, because it is so, if you think about somebody just coming in and taking off your clothes and putting you in water, like if you really stopped and thought about that and they have no idea why you're doing that, that would be so scary.
Unbelievably scary.
And cold. Like there's a whole thing about you really gotta, it's a whole hour process. You gotta slow down, warm the shower up, and and there's just a lot of great resources when it comes to these things that you're going to encounter that are going to be really difficult like that. And I can't even imagine what it'd be like to be married to someone for so long and them not to recognize you. That's insanely hard.
it seems too like there's this kind of spiritual component, having some sort of spiritual practice that helps us not to take things personally.
Yeah.
You know,
No,
and
that's hard. Yeah,
it's
that's
really, really hard. Not
It's
to
hard as a
take things personally.
caregiver.
And then when we do, and when we have that reaction, not to shoot another arrow at ourselves,
Right.
give ourselves some grace again and again and again, and just give each other that grace again and again and again. And it's just, it helps me. Like, I have to constantly, you know, be listening to podcasts and different things reminding me, oh yeah, that's right. I'm working on not taking stuff personally again because I forgot again, you know? And so
Yeah.
like having some resource, some refuge, you know, for ourselves that we can go back to again and forgive ourselves again for like, oh, I did the thing again where I got impatient, or, you know, it's just, I think that's a big component to that
Oh,
caregiving
absolutely.
piece.
Well, and we have to remember we are human and we have feelings, you know,
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
saying. And that's why it is important to encourage yourself to get help, to have somebody come in and provide respite, to go on that walk by yourself if you need to, and to utilize the volunteers with Methow at Home or family members to give yourself that break so that you can regroup and fill your tank back up so that you can come back and be 100% for your loved one. I mean, as a caregiver, it's of somebody that is not a loved one. You know, I've been called every name in the book, and, you know, it bounces off of me because I don't have that personal relationship. I mean, I do, but, you know, it's not that it's not as emotionally charged if it's your loved one. That's a whole different that's a whole different ballgame. And so that, you know, that is incredibly difficult emotionally. And so you need to find ways to give yourself a break. And remind, and like Tracy is saying, remind yourself that to not take it personally. That person that you love would have never have said those things or done those things to you. They would never have taken a swing at you. Their brain is dying, and there's just nothing that we can do about that. So since we can't do anything about curing dementia, we have to change our perception. And that does put the burden on us, and it's a heavy burden. I'm not going to lie, it's a lot. But because we love those people, and there was a big time when they loved you immensely back, we have to try to remember that.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks
Yeah,
so
thank
much
you.
to you too.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah.
And changing the culture one little drop at a time.
There you go.
And
And supporting each other.
Yeah.